I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, one nation, and justice for all. I may be seated. KJ, you took a shower, right? All the way through? I showered in. So you have to get it done. I kind of walked in watch
I don't know, it's a dog bathrobe.
So did you lather up before you got in the shower?
No, I was in the shower and I was before you turned on the water. I put soap all over me and it was I see how you release it. It's so similar. Yeah, especially with you. It's like you.
That's the worst thing that can happen.
All right, good evening. Let's go over a couple things. We'll pray together and then we'll start with class. Let's see. Before break, I don't think there's really anything else when y'all leave tomorrow, so there's definitely not. There's a couple things to know when you get back. Hello Thanksmas, I put it, it was on the screen. Hello Thanksmas is going to be really soon when y'all get back. I think December 2nd. And so be prepared for that. Hello Thanksmas is, you might have guessed, a combination of Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. Pretty innovative. And anyways, and so we just celebrate all of them in this one big meal. We're going to go to Billy and Shelby's driveway. There will be a nice banquet prepared, and then you just come and get food. Now, if you want to help with that, there are a number of ways that you can help. It's one of our favorite things that we get to do throughout the year is Hello Thanksmas, and hopefully you'll get to see why. But if you want to help either with setup, there will be ways that you can help with setup, between moving the tables and chairs out there or just like decorating. But also with food, there's gonna be a lot of food provided, but we always want to extend, like, we would love for y'all to bring food as well. And so if any of you want to bring like some sides or desserts, especially those of you in apartments who can cook, that's a really helpful thing. Just we'll have like a meal train soon where I'll post it in the Instagram bio, and you can put like what you want to bring and whatnot. And so that'll pile up here pretty soon. But have that on your radar for when we get back. Also, December 7th is our Christmas party. And so I'm just going to give you a heads up on that, but we can watch Frank Claus.
Let's go.
I knew it. I knew it. I knew it took me a second, but I was about to call on you, and I was like, I don't even need to. Yeah, we're going to watch Frank Claus and do other Christmas things. And so the only thing I currently have on the schedule is watching Frank Claus, though. So be prepared for that.
We watched Frank Claus twice.
No. We're barely going to watch it once. Anyways, so I think that's all for events. One thing I do want to let y'all know about, I don't know about, it's maybe the best. I want to commend you. There have been a lot of things that we've done this semester that may not have been the most glamorous or something that you may have been the most excited about, but there have been many of you who have really pitched in a number of ways throughout the semester. And this always is kind of the case, but I've especially noticed it this semester how hands-on a lot of you have been, how involved you've been in the work that we do here at Dalraida. And as a congregation, I hear things often like, wow, like I'm so glad that these students did this and that they were here and there. But it doesn't always get expressed to you. And so consider this the expression to you of a lot of you have helped with our food bank, with our food bank, like we've had 70 to 80 people here. Robert will probably give me a better number than that, but we'll say roughly 70 to 80 people here a week getting food, especially recently, right? Because of the whole government shutdown and SNAP and whatnot. That's been a big need for our community that our food bank has been able to fill, and some of you have helped with that, and we appreciate that. Some of you have helped with like the teddy bears, like the old women who come, the older, grayer-haired. There's no better. I've already ruined it. Anyways, the other women in the church who don't tell Miss Jenny I said that. Don't tell her. Other women who make. That was such a mistake. The women who make the teddy bears. They were really encouraged the other day. I walked through with Lewis, and they told me that like 10 of you students came to help with that. And they were so excited about it and telling me about it. And AK was still there, so she's telling me kind of who went and stuff. But that was just so encouraging for them. And like, I mean, you probably know like what those teddy bears go and do, and they go to like children in hospitals and that kind of stuff, and they've been doing it for like decades. But it was, what I'm proud of you for is certainly that work, but also like you encourage some of our members just by being there. And there's a lot of power that you as college students have in simply like showing up to things that are, I don't want to say required, but I hope you know what I mean when I say it's like you've got to volunteer to go to something like food bank at 7 a.m. Or you've got to volunteer to go to something like teddy bears in the middle of your day to work. And while that thing is probably just a smaller thing to you, it really is so encouraging for our church, and you get to do a lot of good. I know several of you have been in the warehouse this year as well, shipping like humanitarian aid out across the world. And so all that to say, I've been thinking a lot about this week. Y'all have done a lot this semester. Also, and this was the one that most recently struck me, was with our Mission Connect, with getting to go and sit with other people in the congregation, especially those who may be widowed or don't have someone to talk to very often. Y'all took all of the envelopes this past Sunday, and there were none left. And lots of people were sat with, and I had several people come back to me and say, I got to know this student, and it was so great. It was so nice getting to know this person. I was so encouraged by them sitting with me. And that's stuff you may not really hear, but they come to me and talk about it, and say your name, and then say they were so encouraging to me. And so that was encouraging for me to be like, wow, like y'all are really invested in working, and I'm really proud of you. And so I just want to make sure that y'all know that Dalraida as a whole is encouraged by you just being at things like that and taking part of things like that. That's a really big deal. And so I want to praise the good effort that you've given this semester, and hopefully that should bring some excitement into the next semester as well, because there's going to be plenty more opportunities. Okay. We will say a prayer, and then we will start with class. Is there anything that y'all want to pray about? There's a number of things that I'll talk about here in a second. But is there any things that y'all have first? Oh, sorry, I thought you had your hand up. Smiths. Especially. Okay, so we've had a number of things at Dalraida recently, one of them being one of our families, the Smiths. We prayed for them last week as they were headed up to Ohio because Mr. Adam was going to have surgery up there. Well, recently there were some complications with him recovering from that surgery, and he had to go to the emergency room Monday night. And so I think that his wife and his daughters are here tonight, but Adam's still at home. And so we're going to continue to pray for them, especially with the complications in mind with recovering from that surgery. But we'll also pray for the Jerkovskis. We've been praying for them frequently with Brian and Deanna and their kids. But Mr. Don, who is Deanna's father, just passed away a couple days ago. And so we want to make sure that we're praying for that family as well. And Miss Joanne, who is now without a husband. And so we'll be praying for that whole family. Yeah, Tom.
I haven't heard anything about the surgery today.
Okay. Mr. Lester. So Abby's granddad, Mr. Lester, had kidney surgery today, and he had just recently had a pacemaker put in. I think we prayed about that last week as well, and so we'll continue to pray for that. Okay, let's pray together. Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for right now, especially we're mindful of the church, for the body of Christ, and how encouraging it is. We are so thankful that you have made this your design, that you've thought about that there will be times on earth where we can be discouraged, and you've placed people around us, other Christians who have like mind and strive as we do to be with you, to encourage one another. And we're so thankful for that. We ask that you help us as we finish this semester, as we go home to be with the church back home, and as we come back to Dalraida next semester, that we can continue in the work that we're doing as a group, as we work with the church to fulfill your mission, to extend your borders, and to tell people about you. Help us to come back with a zeal to do what is good, and to be excited for the work that we get to do. We come to you with some requests. We ask that you be with Mr. Lester in his surgery that he had today on his kidney, and also as he's recovering from pacemaker surgery. We praise you for hearing our prayers about that pacemaker surgery and that it went well, but we ask that you continue to be with him as he's recovering from the one that he had today. We ask that you be with the Smiths, especially with Adam as he's recovering from his surgery. You know the trials that he's been through leading up to this, and the trials that he will continue to endure, as well as that family. We ask that you comfort them, that you give us the strength to be able to be comforters for them, and that they continually look to you in these difficult times. We ask that you be with the Jerkovskis as well, with the passing of Mr. Don. Be with Brian and Deanna and their kids, and encourage them, especially Miss Deanna right now in their loss, and help them to remain strong as they're still caring for Miss Deanna's mother. We thank you for being our God, and help us to always see how good you are, and to live our lives in response to your goodness and your mercy. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. Okay, if you got your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12. So last week, we talked about Romans chapter 8, and we talked about suffering and kind of how Paul portrays suffering in Romans chapter 8 as almost like being in earth rather than being in heaven. And he would rather be in heaven, and while he's here, we've got to endure so that we can be there, so that we can be with the Father. But suffering is not something that only happens just kind of naturally because we exist here. Like bad things also happen on earth, like specific events, specific things that can happen to us. And namely, what we're going to talk about with this passage in Hebrews is how we may be treated by the world. Well, what does it look like to be treated as children of God in the world? I think about Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7, where he starts the verse by saying, like, don't be anxious, be joyful. These ideas that seem in a setting where you're persecuted, it seems almost impossible. And later in that verse, when you get down to verses 6, 7, 8, that area, when he says, the way that you do that is give these anxieties, your requests to God. Make supplications to him, and then you will receive a peace that's better than any understanding you could have, right? Paul's kind of talked about this already, but we're going to talk about it from Hebrews chapter 12. And let me ask you this question before we get into the text. For an adopted child, we're thinking about adoption, like a real, someone who's really adopted. Well, think about what this would be like. For an adopted child, how could you potentially interpret discipline? And I'm not going to give too much context to that because we've been talking about it all semester, right? But for one who is adopted, how would you see receiving discipline?
I think that depending on like their past, it may be like if they came from like an extremely like abusive home, like whether physically or mentally, like hearing discipline, like it may be associated with like negative of like I'm not gonna have food, I'm gonna get injured. as for in reality, discipline can be like a good thing. Like I didn't like being grounded when I was little.
Yeah.
But it makes me a better person.
Right. Okay, so that's a good point. Depending on what your experience is, where you're coming from in the world, discipline can be interpreted in a number of ways. And probably I would think most obviously, and there may be other answers to this, but most obviously I think it is, maybe you would be tempted to misinterpret discipline. Oh, you're going to treat me this poorly. I thought I was supposed to be treated this way here, and now I'm, maybe it's like when you're a child and maybe you get spanked or something, or you get older and maybe you still get spanked, or you get like grounded, or whatever discipline looks like. The Hebrews writer is about to say that discipline's never really joyful. Like it's never really something that's like yay, like discipline. Even the Hebrews writer portrays it that way. And so from a child who was adopted to actually receiving discipline, one who never really received it before, you can imagine it's not really accepted well, I would guess, right? Not something that you would really look forward to. Maybe it would cause you to question the one who's supposed to take care of you. The one who's disciplining you, it may cause you to question, like, do you really love me? Why am I experiencing this bad thing? Why would you do this? And I think that this is something that the church here in Rome, that we assume it's Rome, because it's being written to in Hebrews, could potentially be thinking. And this is something that the Hebrews writer is going to be addressing here. And so the writer is going to reframe suffering. He's going to reframe it. Well, I say reframe it. He's going to put it in its rightful place to be discipline. But it's discipline with a purpose. And when I say reframe something, I'm saying this is how I think about it now, but I need to think about it differently. So how can I think about it differently? The Hebrews writer is going to help them. He's going to say, this is how you think about it now, but let me tell you how it actually is. Reframe it. Think about it differently. In Hebrews chapter 12, we're going to be in verses like 3 through 11, 4 through 11. But some context to Hebrews is they are suffering for the sake of Jesus. Philippians chapter 1, toward the end of the chapter, talks about that very idea. Paul talks about living and being persecuted or suffering for the sake of Jesus. These people have had their possessions taken away. We see that in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 32 through 35 or so, that they are having their physical possessions taken away by their government, those who are persecuting them. And he says, but hey, look, we're striving for an eternal possession. And so let them take your physical ones. We're striving for eternal. This is all a push. I know you're going through hard things, but let me tell you what's most important. And then he also talks about, starting in chapter 1, like the very beginning of chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, he talks about Jesus' sonship. Jesus is a son, and what that looks like as he lived on earth, and how he obeyed on earth, and how he suffered because of it. You can look in chapter 2, you can look at the beginning of chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and you can see that Jesus had to suffer as a son. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But he's going to say here in verse 4, but you haven't suffered yet to the point of blood. And what that tells us is that they're not yet having to maybe die for their faith. But it's coming. How do we see that? How do you handle that? Like, how am I supposed to grasp that God is my Father, and yet this is what is coming for me? And the effect of this, and we kind of see it at the end of chapter 10, verses 36 through 39, is that their faith seems to be wavering a little bit. Their faith, he says, like, yes, you've had your possessions taken away, but we're striving for an eternal faith, an eternal possession, because we have faith. And our faith is not a faith that shrinks back, he says, but one that continues to push forward, and that leads into chapter 11, talking about the faithful people in the story of God. Let me ask you this. Let me go back and let me go extra. Well, you're getting all the notes, so just roll with me. What is the reason that one is disciplined? Why discipline in the first place? What's the point?
To teach you right from wrong.
Okay, teach you right from wrong. What else?
To show you that the person who is disciplining you cares for you.
Okay, so there's an element of that as well. It's like the one who is disciplining cares for you. Is there anything else you can think of? Yeah, Tom.
I would say like right and wrong, definitely, and then even also like to keep them safe that way. It's something dangerous there.
Yeah, because it's best for you. Like there's a reason. Sometimes discipline is for correction, and that's probably how we first think of it, right? Like there's little kids that get spanked because we did something wrong and we need to do what is right. So that teaches us this is wrong, this is what we need to do right. But sometimes discipline is for formation. It doesn't necessarily mean you did something wrong. It's more so like your parents are trying to instill something in you, teach you some boundaries so that you can live your life in accordance with these boundaries. Now, for those of us who didn't have good or maybe involved parents, then you may recognize now how harmful that can be to be without discipline, because you're having to teach it to yourself, right? You're having to learn, oh, this is why I needed discipline, and not having it for so long may create some bad patterns. And so now you're having to train yourself to be disciplined, and that's hard. And that's why good parents are such a blessing. But this was never God's way, that you're supposed to be teaching yourself these things, nor is it how he treats his children. It's because he loves his children, and he knows what is best to be instilled in them, he disciplines them. So let's read this text together and then talk about it. Can someone read that for me?
You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood and striving against sin, and yet you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives.
And it's helpful, I meant to put verse 3 in here and I didn't. It's helpful to look back on this as well, because what he's doing is, it says Jesus is, my heading here, it says Jesus the example. And Jesus is the example of how to suffer. And he says he's the one that we're running toward, and fixing our eyes on him, because he authored and perfected, began and completed our faith. And he says in verse 3, consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. We are looking to Jesus so that we can endure. And then he gets into verse 4. He says, hey, look, we just talked about it. Jesus died for our sins. You have not resisted to the point of shedding blood yet, and you're striving against sin. And then he says, you've forgotten this exhortation. And this is supposed to be a word of encouragement. It's supposed to be something that's like, hey, don't forget who you are here. He says, this is addressed to you as sons, as children, my son. He pulls this verse from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. And what he does is he kind of puts the audience in a new context. And the Hebrew writer does this a lot, where our audience is here, but he says, think back with me and come with me over here. And he says, think about, this is addressed to you, my son. Do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. Now there's obviously, he's talking about the father image, the parent that we just talked about, the father image. And in this, I think we get some correction and some formation. Go with me to Deuteronomy 8. Well, it's on the screen. So sometimes, so what we've got here is we've got the Hebrews writer who references back to the Proverbs. And there's a similar word that we're going to pick up, discipline, or disciplines. Now, hang with me. If you're a Jew who is reading Proverbs here, you're reading Proverbs 3. Many people think that you're going to read this in the word disciplines and you're going to think back to Deuteronomy, where God says this to his people in Israel. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore, you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, walk in his ways, and to fear him. We're picking up this word disciplines again. What he does is he kind of brings us back to a context of Israel going to the wilderness, being disciplined. He says, you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you if you disobey, just as a man disciplines his son. He's picking up the father idea again. Now, Israel, we know when they went to the wilderness, they had to be disciplined because, well, they did something wrong, and that was for correction. But it was also, let me teach you how to trust in me, because you obviously don't know how. Let me teach you how to rely on the Father. And so there's formation there as well. God has always disciplined his people, and sometimes it's for punishment and correction, and sometimes it's for formation, And sometimes it's both. And I think with the wilderness, we get both. They did something wrong, but they also need to be formed. And God's going to help them with both. And so I think the Hebrews writer is kind of calling on this context here and this connection that we made when referring to the church in this instance. And what he's trying to tell them is suffering has a purpose. Suffering's got a purpose. You don't just, with what we're doing here, the suffering that we're going through, we don't just suffer for no reason. The Father's love is seen through discipline. It's an idea that's always existed with God's people. His love is seen in his discipline. The church here in Hebrews is in need of discipline. Their faith is not strong enough to endure hardship without wavering, apparently. Now, this is not a punishment for being weak, but what we're seeing is this is an opportunity for them to grow stronger, this church in Hebrews. You think about Romans 5, 3 through 5, and James 1, 2 through 4, both are passages that talk about what can be produced in suffering. And the point is that suffering should cause us to have qualities that looks like God. This is like an apologetics argument. Next semester on Wednesdays, we're going to talk a lot about apologetics, and Billy's going to teach that class. And it's a lot of, that is an apologetics argument, is bad things can happen to make us look more like God, to form us. And that's a biblical idea. A characteristic of God's people, and this is something that's always existed for God's people, is that they suffer. But that they always grow. And they should always be developing qualities that cause them to reflect God more clearly because of their suffering. Think about Hebrews 11. You know, all of these people who did something amazing in faith. All of them had to go through something difficult. Maybe a lot of really difficult things. And that's what makes their stories so amazing, right? And now the difference here between, you know, this context of Israel and Proverbs and the Hebrews church is this. The church in Rome here, the church, the audience, obeys God while in the world because Jesus did. Jesus obeyed God while he was in the world. This is like a really, really big deal in Hebrews, is like Jesus is the example in every way. How to endure the world? Look at Jesus. And we obey because Jesus obeyed while he was in the world. It's Jesus and his obedience is how their sins are cleansed. It's the foundation of their obedience. It's the reason that they obey. They have access to grace, and it's a daily resource for the church, something that they have to constantly go to. See it in chapter 4, verses 14 through 16, and in chapter 10, verses 19 through 25. So the discipline that they're receiving now, and it's important to establish as we move on, is not punishment for their sins. It's not like God's punishing them because they've done something wrong. Their sins have already been cleansed. So what is it? Let's get to the next verse. So we'll pick up and read verses 7 and 8.
If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons.
Okay. Now, thinking about what we talked about, reading this verse, is the writer saying that God is the direct result of their suffering? And is he referring to all kinds of suffering? Like, is it for discipline that God's children suffer on earth from death and sickness and tragedy? Like, is this all God? My question is the writer saying that God is the direct cause of all their suffering? I'm getting some no's. Why would that be?
Scripture also outlines righteous versus unrighteous suffering. So not every unfortunate thing, not every suffering that we endure throughout our life is from God, because sometimes we bring it upon ourselves in our fleshly desires and tendencies.
Absolutely, and that's a good point. Let me narrow in the question then. Is this writer telling the Hebrew audience, the church in Rome here, hey, God has caused your suffering. This suffering is from the Father. It's kind of a harder question, right? It's something that you kind of have to wrestle with, because there's what's the word here? Consequences, I guess. Whatever. Repercussions. There we go. To both. If he did, okay. Well, what does that tell us about God? And if he didn't, then what's he say? And so to answer this question, I think we first need to look at what it was like to be the Son of God on earth, according to the Hebrews writer, right? Remember in verse 3, he's the example. He says, "For consider Jesus, who endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." He's the example of how to endure suffering. And so, to answer the question, let's first look at the Son of God. In chapter 2, verses 5 through 18, he kind of outlines the reason that Jesus had to become man. The Son of God had to come down and become flesh. And specifically in verse 10, that's especially the verse you want to look into. He says, it was fitting that Jesus suffered. It was necessary that he suffered. And through Jesus' suffering, through what he had to endure on earth, he was made perfect. He was made complete. Look with me in verse 10 here. And he became the pioneer, or maybe, I think another was like founder. There's a couple of different ways to translate that. But he became the pioneer of our salvation. It is through suffering that Jesus was able to provide salvation. And it was expected that he would endure. It was expected. Yeah, he's going to suffer, but he's going to endure. And that is how salvation is going to be brought to mankind. It's been all through the Old Testament. It's had that idea, like in Isaiah 53, namely, but there's a lot of verses there. It's going to say that my servant is going to come to earth and he's going to suffer. God's saying that in the Old Testament, and that's exactly what Jesus did. He brought salvation to the world through suffering. And then you can look in chapter 5 and chapter 9 and chapter 10, and you can see how the writer emphasizes that Jesus was totally obedient and that he was completely persistent through suffering in the world. He showed how reliant he was on God. Now the question is, we're talking about the Son of God here, was God the direct result of Jesus' suffering on earth, of how he was treated? We're talking about, remember verse 3, consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself. Was it the direct result of God that sinners treated Jesus the way that he did? I would say no. No. Now, did God know it was going to happen? Yes. He talked about it. But is it the direct result of God that Jesus was treated poorly by the world? No. The world responded to Jesus the way that it did because that's how the world responds to what is good. In John chapter 3, verse 19, Jesus says, and this is the judgment, the light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness. They loved the darkness more than the light because their works were evil. That's how the world operates. In John chapter 15, verse 18, he's telling his disciples, if the world hated me, how much more are they going to hate you? That's how this works. And so it's not that God was the direct result of the suffering of Jesus. It's that the world hates good. Jesus is good. The world hated Jesus. And so that's just a natural response that comes with being the Son of God. Now, was God the direct result of the church's suffering? Was he the cause that caused them to suffer? I would say no. Like how suffering on earth was necessary for Jesus, like how it was necessary for Jesus to be made complete or perfect through suffering and extend salvation to the world, suffering on earth is necessary, I think, for God's children as well, to receive that salvation that Jesus extended. But does that mean, okay, let me go searching for suffering? Let me find a way to suffer because that is what it means to be a child of God? Well, certainly not, right? Is it what we look for, since this is necessary to share in the suffering of Jesus? Well, no. Did Jesus search for suffering? No. He just endured it because of his nature, of who he was. That's how the world just treated him, because he was the Son of God. It's not because he was looking for it. It's because it found him. That's how the world treated Jesus. And in the same way, the church in Rome here, children of God, are experiencing suffering, but it's not because they want it. It's because of who they are. It's their status, their nature, their gods. So how's the world going to treat them? Just like Jesus said in John 15, verse 8, or verse 18. If they hated me, they're certainly going to hate you. They're God's children, the church is. And this is how the world always responded to God's children. Now let me ask you a question in verse 8. I think this is an interesting phrase that we get here. He says, it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. And that's why we looked at, okay, well, how did God deal with his own son? How did God deal with Jesus? For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. What does that mean? What does it mean that we are illegitimate children if we do not partake in the discipline? What's God trying to express here?
You're choosing to not be in the family.
Yes, okay, so I see what you're saying. So if suffering occurs and I bail, I give up, then I have chosen, kitchen's too hot, I can't handle this suffering, so I'll leave. I'll abandon the family. So I see what you're saying. What else, Cooper?
Well, we were just saying that it reminds us of Romans 8, verse 29, where he says predestined for adoption, which is what we've been talking about a lot.
Right.
But if you don't participate in the suffering, you can't be predestined for adoption when that day comes. It kind of reminds us of Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael was not the son of promise because I forgot where I was going.
You're almost there.
Yeah,
Huh.
what he said.
Because what?
Because he wasn't walking in faithfulness, he wasn't the son of promise. That's what we were talking about.
Okay.
And because he wasn't walking in faithfulness, and like faith without works is dead, he wasn't giving the works or walking in the faithfulness, he wasn't a child of promise because he wasn't faithful. So he didn't have that adoption into true sonship. So that's why he wasn't a child of promise.
Okay. 2 brains equal 1 thought. I almost followed it. You lost me at the Ishmael part, but I follow enough. I see what you're saying. Faithfulness. Faithfulness is required to be a son of God, the child of promise. I guess is what y'all are talking about. But and maybe a little bit different. But I see where you're going. Now, what we've been talking about here with these comments is more so of how do you respond to suffering. Well, if I respond, understanding this is how this is living as a child of God, and so I'm going to persevere. Okay, well, we're not going to abandon the family then, and we're going to remain faithful even in difficult times. But I think, while that could be part of it, I think that what he's talking about is, we're saying, but if you are without discipline, is the contrast. I think without discipline is not, you've been disciplined, but you ran from it. It's, you're without it entirely. And so what the writer seems to be saying is, if you are without discipline, if you're not enduring any suffering because of the world that you live in, then you must not be children. And this is not I'm running from how I'm being treated, but more so because of your nature, your status as God's child, then that should bring on hate from the world. That's just how this works. It's historically how it's always been, and it's how it was with Jesus, and it's how it should be. The writer's saying with you. That's how it should be. And don't forget who you are. Remember, this is an encouraging word. He says, this is who you are. My son, do you not regard who you are? This is the father discipline. This is how this works. You're part of the family. And it's not that without this level of persecution, we can't be called children of God. And we're going to talk more about our context in a second. See, the writer is talking specifically about suffering that is brought on by loyalty to Christ. Suffering, because our status as children of God is something that it marks legitimacy, and that's the next part. Suffering is a mark of legitimacy. It means, yes, you are. You are living in such a way that is so different from the world that the world hates you. That's a sign. You're different than the world. The world even recognizes it. The world's always responded to God harshly, even God's people, when they've been influenced by the world, right? Look in the Old Testament and read how many times that they despised or rejected or hated God because they were influenced by the world. And it's not that we should be searching for this kind of hate, but that this is how the world, darkness, sees Christ and his message. Let's go on to the next slide. Someone pick up verses 9 through 11.
Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems not to be pleasant, but painful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterward it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness.
Okay, starting in earlier in the text, verse 9, what is the author saying about the father and discipline here? What's he comparing it to and why? There's another one coming. Ken, what do you think?
Shoot, I spaced out.
Well, your name's not Ken, but that is pretty close.
Oh, my bad.
I said, no, my bad. Maybe multiple people heard me wrong. I said, Ken, what do you think? And then you almost covered him. If you had,
I added myself for no reason.
yeah, you sure did. You sure. Camera's not paying attention, everybody.
I sure shot up and said Ken.
All right, Ken, what do you think? What is the author saying about the father and discipline in verse 9? What's he comparing the father to and why? I called him because you were looking at the screen and I was like, yeah, Ken's locked. I got him. Read it wrong.
You put me on the spot.
My bad. All right, Luke. Luke's going to save you.
He's comparing discipline from how an earthly father would discipline us. We're saying that we should respect that discipline and be happy that he's disciplining us.
Yeah, okay, so there we go. He says, we had earthly fathers who disciplined us. He's been playing on this idea the whole time. We respected our earthly fathers. Well, shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits, to our God, and live? He says, our earthly fathers disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. That they had good intentions, but they're limited. They're human. And he says, but God disciplines us for our good. Not that our fathers didn't discipline us for our good, but that God, when he disciplines, it is always good. He's not limited by human judgment. It's always good. So that, and here's the purpose, so that we might share in his holiness. What is the purpose of the Father's discipline? Here is your purpose. Here's how you reframe this idea. How the world treats us so badly. Should I shrink back to that? The Hebrews writer says, no. This is the purpose. That you get to share in the holiness of God. You get to share in his nature. And as a result of that, you produce or yield the peaceful fruit of righteousness. We are at peace with God. We share in his holiness, and the fruit that we produce shows that we have a righteous relationship with him. He sees us as right in his eyes. Suffering in this frame, we've reframed it now, is an opportunity to become more like our Father, more like God. So children of God should view suffering in two ways. I'm going to put this on the screen, but I know some of you are writing these notes, so I'll wait. Children of God should see suffering in two ways. One, calling back to kind of Romans 8, what we talked about last week. It's just a natural result of being on earth and not being in heaven. Paul describes it that way in Romans 8. But also, we should see suffering as an opportunity to become more like God. Those in the world break when it comes to suffering, when suffering becomes too great. And they run into things that are, to use Hebrews language, shakeable. When difficult things happen, they run to things that aren't firm. Those in the family of God, when they suffer especially, and the Hebrews writer is talking about in the context of persecution, but I think this could apply to all levels of suffering, calling back to Romans 8. Those in the family of God, we use suffering as a means for endurance. Running to a Father whose presence is comforting and whose truth, whose word, the hope that we get to have provides us something that is unshakable. And we catch that at the end of Hebrews chapter 12. At the end of this chapter, if you look ahead, that the kingdom that we get to reside in which we stand, is unshakable, unmovable. Now let's ask this question. This is the suffering and sons. How does this relate to me? Because anytime I hear lessons like this, I always this question. Because we live in the Bible Belt. And so this is a question that when I think, when I study topics like this, it often comes up, okay, we live in Alabama, okay, or Tennessee or Georgia. Like, this seems like something where there's not really a real application for us. Let me ask you a question, and then we'll answer this. I guess you don't have to be a business person, but if you are a business person, maybe you can tell me. How do we track the stock market? What are we looking at here? Stonks, if you will. Nobody invests? Sad. It's okay. Aren't you going to tell me you're all smiling at each other like, okay, none of y'all have money either. Okay, let me tell you about the stock. Not that I have it, but let me tell you about how the stock market works. This is a trick question. I actually kind of already know. What you do if you're going to track the stock market is you look at history, you look at trends, and you make projections. A lot of times when we talk about this, people talk about the news. And the news I never trust. I don't care what comes up. I was like, I see it. I don't know if I believe it. It's hard to believe. It's hard to know if that's really reality, right? Is there actually a chance that we could experience some kind of persecution like this? This is what I need us to do. Think about all of time. Okay, you've got the Bible, you've got history. Think about all of time. Historically, the pattern for God's people is that though there may be times of peace, there then comes times of suffering. And I think the question is, are we so prideful? I was writing, as I'm writing this one, talking to myself here, are we so prideful to think that there is no need to prepare for such a hard time? For such a time where maybe we will be. With as much as is said in the Bible, talking about preparing for battle, handling persecution, and the nature of light versus darkness and how the darkness hates the light, do we think it can never come to our door? Just because we live in a different region? Just because we live in a country that currently somewhat prioritizes the ability to believe what you want to believe? Getting outside of the church bubble, I think you can very easily see how hostile people are to the message of Jesus. Why? Well, because it requires something that's objectively true. And a lot of people, even at Faulkner, don't even believe in that. Okay? It requires true repentance. You've got to actually, something's wrong with you, and you've got to actually change. Nobody wants to hear that. It requires judgment. Whoa, I don't want to be judged. Are you kidding me? I thought Jesus talked about stuff that's peaceful and loving. Judgment. And you're telling me that there's a judgment that it's either heaven or hell, and that, what kind of God is this? And they reject it. And you know what they also reject? You, because you said it. You believe it. Where are you going to stand? Where are you going to stand? How do you respond to that? How do you respond to that in the workplace? Especially for those of you who plan on leaving the Bible Belt. How are you going to respond to that? Because you're kind of called to be talking about things like this, right? The message of Jesus. The sword that Jesus brought, right? This is kind of something that we have to talk about. What is it? I feel like we just talked about this passage the other day, or maybe this is my biblical worldview class, that talks about I think it's in Romans 10, verses 9 and 10, that you have a faith, and the faith is in your heart, but that it should come out of your mouth in confession. The faith that you have inside should come out of your mouth. And when that happens, people may not respond well, especially outside of the Bible Belt, though even within the Bible Belt, if you say there is objective truth, not all religions are true, and that there is a judgment in the world, that is a quote-unquote hostile message. How do you respond to that? We're not above suffering for the cause of Christ, even now and even in the Bible Belt. And we can't be so prideful to think that this could never happen to us. You know, whether it be to us or our children or our grandchildren. And instilling in yourselves and in those who come after you. And I know this, like, I'm 18. Why am I thinking about those who come after me? But follow me here. Look at the generations of the Israelites. How their generation was faithful because they were enslaved and they cried out to God and God saved them and they said, we're never going to do this again. And then the next generation completely forgot because they don't pass it. It's something that you instill in yourselves and your children and your grandchildren, the importance of preparing for times like this, like what we're reading in Rome. Because we're not indestructible. Just because we're in Alabama, right? So hopefully that was kind of terrible way to end the class, I guess. I hope that was a little bit sobering. But for me, I needed to hear that as I was writing it because of what I said. I never really think about these things in my own context, but I probably should. In a couple of weeks, we'll have combined class, and I'll text y'all or I'll like send that out about this. But the Wednesday we come back, we'll be at university, and then we'll have our final class here for the semester. The week after that, Dunzo for your semester. For freshmen, your first semester, almost over. So I'll be praying for y'all as y'all travel back home, as you're with families this week, and how difficult those things may be. And feel free to reach out or call or whatever at any point. And if any of you are in town, feel free to come to our house on Thanksgiving. And on Thursday afternoon, let us know, and we'll feed you. All right, y'all are good to go.